The Amiga was a long-lived platform and got quite a lot of games, and unsurprisingly more than a few didn't get released. But thanks to things like cover discs and the fact that it's an open platform meant that we got more than just a glimpse of those titles. So let's check out a number of games that almost were. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. We start with Operation G2. Now this is one that I remember quite well, as I was introduced to it via an Amiga format cover disc, and being the only demo they had that month, I played it quite a bit. And it looks and plays a little like a dungeon crawler, but instead of having a party, it's just a single person, and you have a gun. So in many ways, this is a slower first-person shooter. And this is also reflected in the type of things that you have to do, as you have to shoot robots, find keys, open doors, but it is still showing that RPG roots with the panel around the view, as you'll find various items that you'll have to put into the different inventory boxes, and I think there might be more boxes than there are item types in this demo, so they were clearly aiming a lot more complexity in this one. There is a time limit that you can see with that green bar on the side that will very slowly tick down, but I'm not sure if that was meant to be there for the full game or not. It might have been the case that you had to solve these ships in a limited amount of time and get out while you could. But you do also have a health bar, that red one, and you'll find a few things that you can use to top it up, as those robots, they fight back. Now I think this showed promise. Yeah, all the rooms mostly look the same, with that metallic grey look, but at the time, I actually thought that looked quite cool. Now I'm sure they could have done more variations in the final game, with different floors looking different, but it's one of those things we can only judge it by what we see in the demo. Now that minimap in the centre is really quite nice, because it shows where the other robots are as well as yourself. Now fighting the robots might be the best part of the demo, as when it comes to the keys, well, you just find these random ones on the floor and then you just have to go around all the terminals to try and work out which one it's for, as there's no indication. There's also these other random terminals that you'll find that don't really seem to do anything. I have no idea what they had planned for it in the final game. Now the cover discs were a great source for finding these unreleased games, as we've seen quite a few in our cover disc face-off series, but in an attempt to show some newer stuff, none of the previous ones will be shown here. So we will be diving into the leaked and in-progress builds that have turned up over the years, in various places like the English Amiga board. Next up is The Big End, the follow-up to the game Donk by The Hidden, and yes, they knew what they were doing with the name. Now after making a platformer, and doing some puzzle games before that for the various magazines, making a racing game seemed like the obvious next step. And I think it's clear to say that they were putting quite a lot of time and effort into the presentation of the game, as it has this lovely looking anime inspired artwork. And while the map does look quite nice, outside of obvious temporary artwork, that I think might also include some AI helpers so they knew where to go, it has a few issues, as, well, there's no collisions, so you can just drive off the track. But with these type of racing games, this sort of top-down style, being relatively common on the Amiga, what new were they trying to bring? Well, they do have some very detailed cars, with the amount of frames of animation and how they can turn around. But also based on the menus, they had plans for quite the detailed driving model, as you can change the wings, the ramps at the front, and even the wheels. And this was one of the big things they were talking about in the magazines, how they're going to have lots of tracks and have you tweak the cars to your liking. For the most part in this demo, I've been messing around with the practice mode, as the race, well, it tends to crash. And that seems to be because this was quite an early version of the game that was used at an Amiga demo show. There is a far more advanced version that was shown off to the magazines that showed different tracks and some of the new artwork, but that one has never been released. And I think it's even amazing that we have this one at all, as it took the work of a number of people to get the old development floppy disks together and then fix them up so they could be released. It's also quite interesting how it talks quite a lot about the CD32 and its controller, as it seems that that was its primary development platform, and it would have made for quite a nice game for that machine. But I guess it's not surprising that it died, and thus this game followed suit. Desolate Worlds shows up next, and this was created by a Polish team, with Vulcan being lined up to handle the publishing. This is quite obviously a Gods-inspired game. Very God-inspired game, from its artwork to how the baddies spawn in, to the slow movement of our main character. Which is a bit of a shame, as I think this would have been so much better if our main character moved faster and was a bit more reactive. And if the scrolling wasn't a little bit weird, as it seems to lag behind the main character in peculiar ways. I don't know, it might just be me. But it also feels quite difficult to not get hit by the baddies, as they'll more or less start shooting at you right away, and you can't duck and shoot at the same time, so you have to keep sort of popping up to take pot shots at them and coming back down again. Or just accept that you're going to take damage and hope that one of them will drop some health. But even if they do, the amount of time that those icons will stay on screen is surprisingly small, and obviously we don't have the speed to be able to collect them in time. Now it might sound like I'm being a bit harsh on the game, and in many ways I am, but I still think there is a decent game here. The level is huge and there's lots of keys to find, puzzles to solve, and all sorts of baddies to contend with, as there's quite the nice variation in what you'll have to fight. As well as find buttons to stand on and elevators to use, so for a first time team I think they did a lovely job. Now it just required a few tweaks to make it better, but I'm not sure how far away this was from being published, as by all accounts the game was more or less done with all the levels being created, but then something went wrong, and there's talk of a lost hard drive that scuppered the project. But later on, they attempted to remake this for the GBA, but that never got finished. So unfortunately, this seems to be all we have left of this promising looking game. The next game moves much faster, as it's Acsis, or Autonomous Cybernetic System to give it its full planned name. And even in this one level demo, it's a nicely done looking main menu. And this eventually leads us on to a very Turrican looking game. But with the power of the AGA chipset, we have a second background, with lots of parallax scrolling. Ooh, fancy. Now it's a shame that many of the games that we've seen in this episode were Amiga 1200 or CD32 games that never were, because I think those platforms really needed these unique titles that were just for them, as I think it would have kept that market for those machines going a little bit longer. At first, this feels like your typical run and gun platformer style game, like the ones I previously mentioned. But as you reach this dead end, it shows off one of its party pieces. You can climb the walls and ceilings, which I really wasn't expecting. It's like they combined Turrican and Assassin into a single game, a single demo anyway. Now there are various weapons for you to find along the way, which you'll seem to lose when you die. But if you're good enough, then you can actually find some upgrades to the guns, and then you'll only go down a level when you die. So be extra careful with this one. The control system is interesting because you can run and shoot at the same time, but if you stand still for long enough, he'll plant his feet on the floor and then you can aim around yourself so you can get some of those arcs going on. There is also this underwater bit that features some walls that you can destroy and secrets to find. Now in many ways this doesn't push forward that much in the gameplay department, but it is quite a lot of fun, and I think that's the important bit. So if the rest of the game was as good as this, then this would have been a title that I really would have enjoyed playing. We are now looking for some Justice, which is a 3D flying combat game. In many ways it is quite similar to things like Guardian, but it does run on earlier hardware, but being full 3D and even texture mapped in places, I think we'll use the extra CPU power of the A1200. I guess that's where they were probably going to aim it at anyway. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of details on the game's development. The demo was released on Aminet in 1996, and it's reported that it had been in development for 3 years by that point, and there isn't any real talk of a publisher or what the plans were for the full game. But in the demo, the goal seems to be to take out a specific set of buildings that you can find by following the arrow that you can see at the top of the screen. But you can also just shoot at anything you want as well. Some will explode and others will not take damage at all. But the ones that do explode, that's some pleasing explosions, I have to say. There's also plenty of craft that will try and shoot at you that you can shoot down as well. While for the most part it's flat polygons with some dithered effects on them, there are the odd touches of textures, and they do look really quite nice. I also quite like the radar that you can see at the bottom of the screen, as well as the fact there's actually multiple weapons that you can mess around with. You just have to press some of the keys to switch between them. You also seem to have a limited afterburner as well. I'm not sure how much afterburner you have, because I've just ran out randomly before. Now I did have a lot of fun with this one, even if it is a little bit basic in the gameplay department. It looks lovely, it runs quite well, and I could see them doing a lot more with this game if they got the chance. And to follow that up, we have the rather generically named game, The Games Machine. This is another game that I don't have too much information on, as the demo turned up on the English Amiga board, and when you try it out, well, it just dumps you straight at the first level. And this is quite obviously a platformer, one that I personally think looks really quite nice. Again, it's AGA only, and those backgrounds might have tipped you off, but it has some nice animations on the main character, and I think overall does a really nice job of using the extra power. At first it'll have you jumping on baddies to try and take them down. Well, some of them require multiple jumps to really take them out, and after the first one, well, they might just get annoyed and try and move away. But you'll continue to make it into the level, where you'll find that there's checkpoints, which is always a good thing, but there's also a bubble power-up, and that allows you to, well, yes, fire bubbles. But that will scoop up the baddies in a very nicely animated way. There's some lovely work going on there. And then you can pop them to get them out of your way in one go. There's also some light puzzle solving as you have to find switches to get the anchors to move up and down, and it's all very Mario-like, as there doesn't seem to be a collect 'em up element to this game. It's just you trying to make your way to the end of the level, even if that does require you going through this massive bubble pit. But unfortunately we don't get too much of a HUD, we just have this picture at the bottom that seems to be a logo, and that's about it. It doesn't show how many lives we got or how much health we have left, as you can take a few hits. I'm just not sure how many. It also has this really nice bit of music. Yeah, it loops after a while. It has this great 8-bit vibe mixed with the Millennium games, you know, like Oscar and the like. And I think it works really quite nicely. Yes, it's a shame that there's no sound effects, but that might have been planned, as it seems that they were planning quite a lot for the final game, as there's an end screen that mentions lots of levels, bonus worlds, and a whole lot more. This is another game that I think could have done really well if it actually came out. And finally, one that sorta breaks the rules. But then we've got to have at least one of these, right? And that has to be Putty Squad. The game that was reviewed, had a number of demos in a number of magazines, but then never came out. And how is this breaking the rules? Well, almost 20 years after it was reviewed, it finally got released. With a limited physical release, but also it was put on the System 3 website for anyone to download. And just getting this release out was quite difficult, as it was copy protected, so they had to work with some of the cracking community to remove that protection, as all they had were the final discs. Now, Putty Squad did get released for the Super Nintendo and then later got ported to a few machines, so it's not as if we couldn't play the game. But now we could play it as it was meant to be played, on its original hardware. And it is a lovely game. You get to use all the new abilities to traverse these huge levels to find missing in action red putties, who have to be absorbed, and then you can move on to the next level. But there's multiple routes and things that you can find on each of the levels. And some of the abilities that you find further increase the options that you have to get around, so it's a lot of fun. So if you've not played it, grab a copy from the System 3 website. And with that, I think we've covered enough games. And it's been an interesting and varied lot as well. So if you enjoyed this, you can tickle the buttons just under the video to let the almighty algorithm know that you did. Or you could let me know of some other unreleased games that you think I should check out. And until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was a series of unreleased, almost or not quite games, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. This was a really fun video to research and make, so I hope you enjoyed the end product. And if you want to see some of the other unreleased games, then check out the playlist for my cover disc face-off videos, as they tend to show up more often in those.